Welcome to another Trailmakers showcase. Since I've recently got over 3,000 hours in this game, I decided to make a couple videos on my favorite builds from throughout the ages. Today we're going to look at my favorite aerial builds, from planes to flying cats. So without further ado, let's get into it. Speaking of cats, so the first build we're going to look at is the Bumble Mark 4B, which is an odd little creature in that the entire vehicle is basically a giant turbine. So the engines spin up, and then the fins will change angles to go forwards or backwards. And it has rockets and smart cannons. And it controls its movement with helicopter engines. And as you might be able to see, we also have a bomb bay. What are the buttons? There's the buttons for it. Been a while. Now this is a pretty old build, so there's not a whole lot more to it, but I wanted to show it off because it was relatively interesting. They're perfectly balanced end to end. They're heavier on the bottom, so they naturally want to sit upright. And yeah, they're the Bumbles. And while I'm at it, I'll show off the Bumble Mark 7, the Big B. I don't know if you can see its little eyes there, but yeah, it's got kind of a face. And this is the same kind of thing, except the propellers have an enclosure around them, and it's got more weaponry. And something that I didn't mention about the other one is that the Bumbles, or at least the later Bumbles, I forget if the early one, the first one I showed was, actually, but they're all semi-aquatic. They're much slower underwater, but they can still move around and free themselves from the water's grasp. Fun fact, this bee once conquered the entire end of the airborne campaign on its own without having to repair. So, armoring up the turbines proved effective. Just set her down there. Next we have our first plane, the Kitten Jet Mark 8A. It's a cat bat. It's got some design features that I never used again, and some features that followed me for a long time. But this is one of the first planes that I put thrust vectoring on, so I decided to show it off. It's got pitch and roll thrust vectoring attached directly to the control surface servos, and then the yaw thrusters are on the wingtips. So we're able to taxi on the ground decently, thanks to the wingtip thrusters. And this is well before Airborne came out, so it doesn't have any auto-aim. And I just wanted to show it off because it's one of the first planes that I really put some real effort into the look and feel of it, and it's still kind of fun to fly around. Sure, it's slow and doesn't really have the ability to defend itself anymore, but it's still nice. And it can do some cool tricks, like the Cobra maneuver and stuff. Let's just crash it on down, and move on now. Another one of the Mark 8s I want to take a look at is the Mark 8C Hammerhead, which is the first plane that I used piston glitching in, and I did it in order to fit more thrust and weapons in, which is generally what I use it for to this day. So the two sides sink in and squish the cannons in together, but it's still a pretty chunky looking plane, even though it's kind of compressed. And as far as a pre-airborne build goes, it's got good firepower and good weapon spread. And then for ground attacks, it's got those cannons. But this is far from the most stable plane that I have, so it's a little tricky to actually get it on target. And since the cannons aren't accelerated, it's a little hard to get within range without crashing into the target too. But it's still a pretty fun build. And it can do all the things, all the flips and tricks. And, oh, just like the Mark 8A, it uses all skis on the landing gear, so it doesn't slow down on the runway. I don't know why I used to do that. I still use skis in the front, but now I use friction pads in the back. And I switched sometime soon after this plane, I think. Next we have the Kitten Jet Mark 9A, which I believe was the first plane that I made after Airborne came out. So the first one that got auto-aim and everything. And as far as performance goes, it's definitely a step up from most of the early Mark 8s. It's faster and just as agile, with a little bit more yaw force. And there's not much more to say about this, except for, I don't think I mentioned, a lot of these planes that I've shown so far have a simple cruise control, where you can toggle on either a low power thrust, a high power thrust, or have both on for full thrust. Not the most useful thing in the world, but it allowed me to take some of my fingers off the controls to take drinks of water during fights and things like that. So, kinda handy, I suppose. And oh, the friction pads are in the back, so I can probably actually land this. I mean, well, landing that thumpy, I probably would have stopped anyways, but let's move on. And then we have the Mark 10 Jackal Cat, which the Mark 10 series starts off because I started using the Dragon Jets for the thrust vectoring for more power. And, oh, one of our landing gear phased through the deck and kind of got us stuck for a second, but here we go. It's significantly more agile than the early Mark 9s, and especially the early Mark 8s. Probably even the later of the two also. It's a pretty good plane for not having canards, in terms of its agility. And it's also a little quicker than the other ones, but definitely not up to today's standards. Still, this plane kicked a lot of butts back in the day, so I had to show it off and give it its due. Boink. Next we have the earliest version of Squishy that I still have saved. And the Squishy plane here is named so not just because of all the pistons squishing things together, but because it's very easy to shoot down. So it's squishy health-wise too. But one of my favorite things about Squishy is just how darn stable it flies. This isn't the best version, of course. It's only the 1B and up to the 1G, as well as a couple of further marks, but those ones kind of sucked. But Squishy here is a nice little prop plane. There's two little guns, and unfortunately it uses a gyro for its yaw, which I'm currently against gyros, and probably will be for the foreseeable future. They just don't have a place in planes, in my opinion. I use them for other things, of course, but planes, we've got aerodynamics and thrust vectoring and stuff to work with, and real-world planes just don't really use gyros for movement, so I don't think Trailmakers planes should either. But that could get me started on a whole other tangent. Next I want to take a quick look at the Mark 11D, which is pretty pretty nondescript and boxy, especially compared to some of the more cat-themed builds earlier, but it's all about performance. It's one of the first planes that I put articulated canards on for extra pitch control, and I think it really helped it out in the long run. It also has auxiliary roll controls on those flap wings on the corners, in addition to the roll in the back. We're getting closer to my standard armament. This one has 4 smart cannons and 2 rockets. And it goes a decent bit faster than the Mark 10 Jackal Cat, which is good because every generation is supposed to be an improvement on each other. And yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on it because it doesn't have any special features really. It's just a very good plane that shot down a whole bunch of other planes. Next we'll take a look at the Kitten Jet Mark 11L, which is my first VTOL jet. It uses articulated thrusters on the tail and in the body for its VTOL mode, although my button layout is a little finicky. So it uses L2 for just the downwards facing jets, and R2 for forwards facing jets. So I've got to use a little bit more fingers than I'm used to using in order to fly this thing, especially because my later VTOL jets are more streamlined. Also, it has a roll stabilization gyro, just one of those gyro stabilizer thingies. So it can't really maneuver properly. It can just yaw and pitch while it's in VTOL mode. But the gyro turns off as soon as out, so we can fly like a proper plane. Oh, that's so goofy looking when it just snaps into sideways. As you can tell, I'm much more impressed by my later VTOLs, but we'll get to them in a bit. Next up, we take a departure from the planes for our first of the Flying Kittens. This is the Flying Kitten Mark IV, and there it is folded up. Although it sparks pretty badly now. I forget which update that started happening in, but there's a different way that I fold them up now that prevents them from sparking. But this one's pretty basic. It's just flight stabilized, so as soon as you let go of the controls in any direction, it automatically stops itself. It can strafe side to side, move forwards and backwards, and go up and down, and it holds its altitude, of course. And it has a little meow sound effect. And it's just a little cute thing that I used to fly around, that I rebuilt a couple of times and have added a lot of various weapons to it over the ages, and I'll show some of them off as we go. And then we have the Floating Cat Head Mark III, which is a similar concept, except this one's omnidirectional. It can face any direction and maintain its position, and it can fly in any direction. It can strafe side to side, move forwards and backwards, upwards and downwards. And again, as soon as you let go of any of the controls, it automatically stops and holds position exactly where it is. So, no, the video's not paused, it's just sitting there. And it's got a much bigger meow, because it's a bigger kitty. Now back to some planes, because we've got the Nuke Jet here. This is, I think, my first open concept bomb bay plane, where it's just a big kind of horseshoe shape opening in between the wings and everything, to allow big bombs and weird shaped bombs and all sorts of custom payloads, and I think I've even dropped secondary vehicles out of this plane before, although not very big ones. And of course the nuke does nuke things. It's just full of TNT, and it has a high drag tail. well, maybe not a high drag tail, but a decent amount of drag on the tail of the bomb. And that's kind of evident by the fact that we're going 250 with the bomb, and then without the bomb we instantly accelerate to about 290. And also because this is a terribly built plane, without the bomb it pitches up really badly. I've got much better versions of this concept that I'll show in a bit. Now I can't really demonstrate this one alone, but it's kind of fun, so I wanted to show it real quick, because this is a two-seater. The seat on the left controls the roll, and the seat on the right controls the pitch. And they each have one half of the yaw controls. And so you have to be really synchronized or lucky sometimes with your pilot. And yeah, like I said, I can't really demonstrate it because I can only sit in one seat or the other. And oh, and both seats have access to the thrust. So it's kind of like piloting one of those Pacific Rim Jaegers. You've got to work as a team to actually fly anywhere. Kind of fun. Then we have the Kittenov Mark 1D, which I've skipped a couple of versions of, just because this is where the payload starts to get more interesting. We've got a couple of custom bombs, and we've got bomb bays. And there's logic involved so that it drops the bombs one at a time, and then once you're out of the big bombs, the same button will run the bomb bay. Let's go ahead and take off here. Pull up our landing gear. And we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 bomb bays. And unlike the nuke jet, this one doesn't handle so badly when it's missing its bombs. Let's see, let's get back up to speed. Yeah, with the bombs, we're nosing down just a touch. And if we get rid of the bombs, we start nosing up a touch. So it's not nearly as badly balanced. And I've reworked the Kittenov a couple of times, so I'm not sure if this one still has a gyro in it or not, but even with the... yeah, it does. Even with the gyro, it still has aerodynamic yaw turning that also doubles as air brakes when you open both the flaps at once. Now we've got another Flying Kitten, which is the Flying Kitten Mark 7, and as you can see it's armed with some spear launchers. They're piston-accelerated little spears, and it just launches them one at a time, each time you press the buttons. And it's pretty simple. And it's the same little cat as before, but with some pokey pokies. Next we have the Kitten Jet Mark 12S, which obviously has a pretty significant piston glitch going on for it, but it also has a fuel and ammo system to it, with a whole bunch of logic going on. So how that basically works is there's accumulators involved that keep track of everything, and as we're flying we'll be spending fuel, and when we run out of fuel, when the accumulator gets full, it cuts out all the engine power. And similar thing for the guns and the rockets. And we've got 250 seconds worth of fuel. I think it said 100 seconds worth of machine gun ammo in this version, and 12 pairs of rockets. So if I just spam the rocket button a bunch, that's the quickest way to get one of our alarms to come on. There's different paced alarms and different lights for different systems being low or empty. And I think that was our last pair of rockets that I can fire. Yeah, I'm cramming the button and it's not firing anymore, so it's properly disabled. And in order to refill your fuel and ammo systems, all you have to do is land, because there's a distance sensor on the belly. This also has my better version of cruise control, again using accumulators because they were new for this plane, in which you can turn on and lock in whatever amount of thrust you want and just keep your fingers off the controls, like a proper cruise control should do. You can set it and forget it. Although you still have to fly the plane steering-wise, it saves you a couple fingers if you want to take your hands off the controls to take a drink of water or pet your cat, things like that, you know, normal gamer things. But anyways, let's move on. The Flying Kitten Mark 10 has tiny railguns that shoot hand grenades. Well, they're not, I suppose they're not technically railguns, but they're magnet guns, so they're close enough. And the way it works is pretty simple. Kitten throws grenades. It's just noteworthy that, unlike most mechanical pieces, you can piston glitch detachable blocks through other blocks without causing issues. They're all counted as one weld group, the whole piece, so it was a handy little discovery that made this compact. But moving on. We've got the Mark 11 with some box cannons on it, which I just realized are broken because of the update. So this one, let's just set that to right, boop, boop, and set this one, boop, boop, and boop. There we go. I always loved box cannons, but they've been nerfed to near extinction, because now you can't fire them as rapidly. You can only fire 1 per second instead of 10 per second. And they have health now, so after a certain amount of impact damage, the box just poofs. And also, with the impact damage changes a couple updates ago, it also nerfed the strength of them. Basically, these boxes used to vaporize anything they touched, and now they're a joke. Which is why they're now attached to a flying kitten. Because, well, that's also a joke. Next we have a fairly interesting one. We've got the Bio-Boosted Fighter Mark III, which uses bionic engines for both its main thrust and its thrust vectoring. So, kind of unique. The entire plane is only 12 power cores, and that's only because of the weapon, because, like bionic engines are supposed to, they use 0 power cores for propulsion. The acceleration is very good, but the handling, not as much. It is, however, amphibious. So, yeah. Bionic engines. Not always the best application. They're very fragile, so it's really easy to shoot this thing down, actually. But it's unique, so I wanted to show it off. Next we have the Flying Kitten Mark 9, which you might have noticed is a couple versions earlier than the ones I showed off before, and that's because this one had to get fixed after an update, so it's later in the list. But this one has bomb bay artillery. It's piston-accelerated bomb bays with a little bit of logic for a safety fuse. And yeah, it's the same flying cat with a little bit more thrust to it to accommodate the heavy weapons. There's a weight block recoil mechanism and the weight of the pistons, of course. Yeah, just a little grenade launcher cat. And next we have the big cousin to that build, the Bombay Artillery Mark 13. Now the box cannon mode is currently broken because of a recent update, but the bomb bays are still fully functional. And if I just do a quick little transform here to the Mark 18 system, which is obviously I still use all the time, this one does have functional box cannon. Next we have what's been described as the Blimp Cat, the Mark 16 flying kitten. I like this one and I wanted to show it off because, not just because it's got a little booty, but because it uses no gyros whatsoever. It uses thrusters for turning and for its turn stabilization. So it's got a bunch of speed sensors throughout it, not just for the side-to-side, up and down, forward, backwards, but also for the corners. So it'll automatically stop itself from rotating with the thrusters. And if I just crack it open, well, it's not as easy to crack open as I thought. I was just going to crack it open and show you, but I forgot there's a bunch of guts in the way. But yeah, there's some of the logic. Some of it anyways. You got speed sensors in all sorts of different directions. And yeah, it's another flying kitten. And speaking of flying kittens, we've got a bomber that sends some cats to fly. Because they're cat bombs. This is the Mark 13V. And it's a much better open concept bomb bay plane than the old nuke jet that I showed you earlier. And all in all, performs much better. It flies good with the cats on it. It flies pretty good without the cats on it. And it can actually defend itself, unlike the nuke jet. It's got guns and is agile enough to put up a fight. But the cat bombs are a little bit interesting too, because they've got two different fuses. We've got an altitude fuse and an inertia fuse. So there's a speed sensor in there, and when it runs out of forward momentum, like when it tips forward, or apparently when it gets released at the wrong time in the middle of a crash, it'll explode. Now I do perfect these sensors a little bit later, but you'll see that. So moving on. Next I want to pull out the Kitten Jet Mark 14D, because this is one of the fighters that I've made a little too much thrust vectoring in. I used piston glitching to cram an extra space thruster into thrust vectoring, and pitch and roll are all controlled in the same servos in this one, so there's a little bit less drag involved than when I'd used the double tail. But if I just do a little bit of this, you'll see that it suffers from a similar problem as those cranked up gyro jets do, in that it'll spin itself right out and stall. But if you can manage not to overspin it, it's extremely maneuverable thanks to that redonkulous pitch control. But I don't fly it too often, and I really should, because it's a very useful plane for outmaneuvering those cranked up gyro jets, or at least fighting them on their own level. But I don't know, it's just something I don't prefer about it. Another quick look at a flying kitten. We've got the Mark 18, which has instant depth charge launchers. Extra long distance, no charge required. Although this one, it still sparks because it was made before the update that broke it and never got around to fixing it. Then we've come back around to another version of Squishy. This is the Squishy Plane Mark 1F. And as you can see, we've got some aesthetics going on for the wing shaping. A little bit of zero dragging to fix the bad aerodynamics that are involved with the pistons and the shaping. Well, most of the bad aerodynamics. Some of it's still there, but it's mostly good. And the wing shape is based on the Corsair, I think it is? I'm not too familiar with real-world planes, but I think that's one I was thinking of when I built this. And like all the versions of Squishy, it's very stable, but unlike the earlier ones, it no longer has a gyro, it just has possibly way too much thrust vectoring. It's a very light plane, so even one set of space thrusters on each gyro is... or not gyro. Each... words. Servo! Each servo. Yeah, even one on each servo is still a bit much, and can easily spin the plane out to stall speed. Oh, and something I haven't been mentioning about some of these planes, well, a lot of these planes, is they also meow. And now we're getting builds that I still use all the time. So we've got the Kittenjet Mark 12Y8, which is an older plane that's been redesigned and rebuilt a couple of times, because it's just too good to let go of. It used to have a terrible issue with its piston glitch though, where it had a 50% chance of absolutely tearing itself apart when you spawned it in. It no longer does that, however. And it's a well-rounded plane. It's got plenty of thrust vectoring to get into really fast spins and tight maneuvers. Very strong yaw force for its thrust vectoring. And all in all, is a fantastic dogfighter. It's pretty stable, but not perfectly stable. So that's a minus, I suppose. But it also has a couple little bells and whistles that I put into all the more recent planes. It's got some smoke. We've got flares. And we've got fireworks for chaff. And as you might have noticed, it does have a little hinge glitch on it, alongside the piston glitch. And it's one of the few that I've actually done that on. I always kind of shied away from using the hinges for aesthetic stuff. I don't know why. I just prefer pistons. Oops. Now you saw the Bombay artillery gunship a couple of times, and the gunship itself is named the Tadpole. Now this is the mini Tadpole gunship. It's just a little cutie pie. It uses the same weapons from one of the earlier Flying Kittens. And it's got tunes, it's got fireworks, and it's got Bombay artillery launchers. Enough said, right? It's just a little guy. Next, straight out of the transform slot, is the Kittenjet Mark 14I2, which is one of my most stable VTOLs. It's very well balanced, although not perfectly so. But that's because I wanted to make sure that it was also decently balanced for forward flight mode. And kind of balancing between the two modes was a little bit tedious, so at a certain point I was like, this is acceptable. And it is. It's got all the little bells and whistles, but unlike my earlier VTOL planes, this one runs with a bunch of logic and simpler controls. So at any point, you just use R2 for the thrust and instead of having to get L2 involved, because all of the thrusters in the body articulate downwards, and when it's in VTOL mode, the maneuvering thrusters on the tail there don't react to the forward thrust at all, so you can hover in place a lot easier. And all in all, this is an absolute blast to fly, just because VTOLs generally are. But I've got some other VTOLs that I'll show off too, before we end this video, because we're getting into the modern stuff. see, before that I think we've got some other quick things to look at. Oh, we've got the mini omnidirectional flying cat head, which was a fun project to cram all the same logic and controllability into a much smaller sphere. You can see I had to do the clamshell piston glitch in order to fit it in. Yeah, just another flying cat face, but it's got fireworks, it's got music, it's got controls in every direction, and if you use all 4 of the trigger buttons at once, it explodes. Because why not? Oh, we've still got a... I was wondering why we were falling so slowly. We still have a gimbal jet attached to us, functional somehow. Next, we have a plane that has no right being as fun to use as it is. This is the Fighter Nugget Mark II. The Mark I uses gyros, so I'm not going to bother using that, it's enough said. But this one is aerodynamics only, and just has a single blaster in the middle. But for whatever reason, even though I slapped this together in about 65 seconds, it flies so perfectly straight. It's not the most stable in its maneuvers, but once you let it level out, it's just perfect. It's just a perfect little nugget. And it shoots straight through your own head, which is always fun. And yeah, it's the nugget. There's really not a lot to say about it. It's just 10 cores of pure joy that shouldn't be as stable as it is. Burger Cat. Burger Cat. It's used for abducting things, of course, and it has a pretty significant amount of lifting force, to be honest. I don't know what its actual lifting capacity is offhand, but it's pretty good. But it's just a cat riding a burger, so let's move on from it. Next we have the Kitten Jet Mark 13 M8. And this one, in addition to all the other things, has the fuel and ammo system again. Except this time, we've got much better calibration. So, our fuel percentage, you can see at the bottom there, it counts down from 100, instead of counting up from 0. And we've got 50 seconds of ammunition, and 12 pairs of rockets. And again, it'll recharge when landed, but this is a much more stable plane. In fact, it's one of my most stable planes. I have the regular version in my transform slot I'll switch to real quickly. It's probably my most stable jet, and I use it for a lot of formation flying because of that. But it's also pretty good in a dogfight because of that. It'll always be controlled pretty easily the way you want it. Very good plane. In this version of my transform slot's the M6, I think. The M7 has lasers, the M5 is zero drag, but they're all pretty much the same plane after the 4th version. Just with different bells and whistles attached. So I nearly cleared my transform slot again. Next up we have the Kitten Jet Mark 14L Skydancer. And again it's a VTOL. And I call it the Skydancer because it's very agile and fairly graceful. And because it's a VTOL with thrust vectoring, it can basically do everything and anything. It can fly almost like a Star Wars ship can. I think more or less anyways. I mean, technically I would say it flies like a helicopter and a plane, but it's like a spaceship. It can fly backwards, for Pete's sake. Anyways, any special features I can note about this one other than that? No, it's got the flares, the chaff, the meow. All the same stuff. After a while, you start running out of special features to add that are completely new. And we're almost done here, but a couple more. I'm going to show you the Mark 14M Wishbone. Well, this is the M2 with the cat bombs back. And these cat bombs have a safety fuse where they don't arm until 2 seconds after detonate, after release, so that you can drop them and forget about them without blowing yourself up accidentally, because the inertial fuse had a tendency to go early on me. Like, if they rolled, it would go off. So they've got just a touch more logic in the cat bombs. But the plane performs very well with or without payload attached. And as you might have saw before, it's a VTOL. So it can do all sorts of things. And yeah, it's called the Wishbone for obvious reasons. It's wishbone shaped. It's very awkward looking, let's be honest. But it does a good job of what it does. And I believe this is the last aircraft I'm going to show. Because one of the last ones that I've built, this is the top of my list, there's only the Chunko Mark III and the Mark 14P ahead of this. But this is the Mark 14O Pixie Blade. And it's a very compact medium fighter. Like, it doesn't even have side panels. Actually, let me go back into build mode and show you again. The engine bays just kind of mesh together, and they're mounted on logic pieces in a bunch of places. And yeah, it's one of my most compact fighters. It really doesn't look like it should be 76 cores, but it is. And because of so much thrust packed into such a small package, it goes pretty darn fast for my planes anyways. And it's got all the features that you want in it. Now, this plane hasn't actually seen all that much combat yet, but I desperately want it to because it's just a spicy little thing. And I particularly like the paint job that I gave it. It's very nice, like cotton candy tones, the blue and pink. But yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. If you liked any of the vehicles that you saw, a lot of them are on the PlayStation Gallery. And if you see any on here that you can't find, let me know and I'll help you find them or upload them if they're not. And yeah. Leave a comment, subscribe, like the video, all that good stuff. Goodbye now.
PlayStation